Okay, we are live. Welcome to Class 7 of the 10 Perfections. And I'm still Sensei Mui. I haven't changed. We are still here. Okay, tonight we're going to talk about Atitana determination. Atitana is determination, decision, resolution, self-determination, and will. The affirmation that goes with this is from the Theravadan Bodhisattva aspirations, which goes, may I be firm and resolute and have an iron will. May I be soft as a flower and firm as a rock. May I ever be high-principled. Which is a very nice aspiration. There are some really interesting phenomena happening in the Buddhist world these days. One is secularization of Buddhism. Most recently that I found out about was mindfulness training. And what they did with mindfulness training was they took one of the 8 parts of mindfulness meditation and sort of made a cut down version of it. And what happens is that you really don't need a lot of willpower when you do this program. It's an 8-week program of 20 minutes of meditation a day, what we would normally call tranquility meditation, shamatha, which leads to insight, which is vipassana, and it's allowing yourself to sit and whatever comes up, you just let it slide through without judgment, without engagement. Just let it be. It's a very relaxing form of meditation. It is really kind of cool, but it's not mindfulness. Mindfulness meditation has a specific role to play within not just Buddhist practice, but within Buddhist psychology as well. Mindfulness training has a different role to play. And for a Buddhist teacher, mindfulness training, the 8-week course, is sort of like putting a Band-Aid on a cancer. You feel like you're doing something, you can point to the Band-Aid and feel better about doing something about it, but in the long term, it's not terribly effective. Mindfulness training is very, very cool if you're really interested in stress reduction. It has benefits to it as long as you continue doing it. But if you quit after 8 weeks, very shortly all this stuff emerges again. Mindfulness training takes this determination, this adhitthana. One of the things about adhitthana is that it's mentioned a lot in the meditation material. If you notice so far in this whole 10 precepts course, meditation's not part of the 10 perfections. Excuse me, not precepts, perfections. It's not mentioned at all. It plays a big part in the next perfection called metta, loving kindness. Determination is the will to get over our suffering in a big way. And the original mindfulness meditation instructions were, you watch the body first. That's the whole body. That's not just a body scan. That's actually allowing sensations to arise. And then you can watch the bodies within the body. For instance, if I'm sitting here meditating mindfully on my body as things arise, I might get an itch under my nose. Well, instead of scratching the itch, I just sit and I watch it. And I watch how it changes and how it moves and how it eventually goes away, and suddenly a new sensation will arise. And then I watch that sensation. And then I notice that there's a feeling involved in that sensation. And I've only got a choice of three. It's either pleasant, unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So I watch to see which feeling arises. And then inside that feeling, there are other feelings. There might be associations. The itch under my nose, although uncomfortable, might not be unpleasant. Under certain circumstances, it might even be pleasant. Who knows? I could be weird that way. Then we go to thoughts as they arise. And we watch the thoughts. And say one thought keeps coming back over and over and over again, or a particular theme comes back over and over and over again. In my case, that might be potato chips. So I get the thought, potato chip. And I get the sensation of tasting the potato chip. Well, now I got two things to look at. Well, what associations are with potato chips? Childhood memories, watching monster movies with my father on a Friday night as a kid back in Caseyville, Illinois. Good times. Other associations as I got older. So as I'm watching these things arise, I've also got to watch the quality of the thought. By quality, we got, in Buddhism, as I keep saying, we love our lists. There are 52 potential qualities that any thought can have, ranging from joy and euphoria, to sadness, to hate, to fear, to jealousy, to contentment, all these variations of emotion. And then I go back to see if there's bodily sensation associated with the quality of thought. And what I'm looking for are links, karmic links. How am I fabricating my reality? This takes an incredible amount of determination. It takes a lot of energy to do this sort of meditation. It's probably why not many people do it. It's a lot of work. But the results are finding how we are creating our stress, our suffering, our harmful tendencies, how we're doing it. In Buddhism, why is never important. What is important? What is arising? What is happening? It doesn't matter, like, for instance, if a car breaks down, it doesn't matter that what caused the car to break down. That's actually kind of speculative. What has broken down is a lot more important. Then what's even more important is how do we fix it? And this is what mindfulness meditation is about. Now I bring this up because that's pretty much all we're going to talk about tonight, is being mindful and what that means in context of determination. What is doing the determining? Well, we think we are. Well, Ajahn Chah, my first teacher, who said a lot of colorful things in his lifetime, was asked, what is the mind? And he said, the mind is anything. There's a very good reason for saying that, because nobody's actually defined what a mind is. It just appears, disappears, changes, alters its looks, becomes something else. Ajahn Lee, who I did not have the opportunity to meet, he died before I could get to him, said the mind is neither good nor evil, but knows what is good and knows evil. It's what does good and does evil, and it's what lets go of good and lets go of evil. We cannot define the mind, but we can define its function. We know what it does. Okay, determination. The Buddha said, oh, by the way, I have to announce, for years and years and years and years and years, we thought that the Buddha lived sometime between 550 and 440 BCE. We weren't really sure where he lived. Recent archaeological evidences at Lumbini, where he was born, pushes that date back to April 624 BCE. So we have a better idea of when he was actually born. Just thought I'd throw that in, and I'll throw that back out right away. Okay, he said, a person has 6 properties. A person has 6 properties. Remember, he was only interested in human experience. Okay, he has 6 properties, 6 media of sensory contact, 18 considerations, and 4 determinations. He has been stilled where the currents of construing do not flow. And when the currents of construing do not flow, he is said to be a sage at peace. One should not be negligent of discernment, should guard the truth, be devoted to relinquishment, and train only for calm. This is the summary of the analysis of the 6 properties. He's talking about determination again. Well, let's start out. We're going to explain the 6 properties in a moment, but the 6 media of sensory contact: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, tactile senses, and mind, the intellect. Aristotle also said that there were 6 senses, the same 6 that the Buddha refers to. The mind was considered to be the 6th sense. Sometime around 400 Common Era, the church decided the mind was no longer a sense, but instead a soul. So in retrospect, it looks like the church lost its mind around 400. Okay, that's a little joke there. Sorry about that. One thing I'm known for is bad humor. Okay, 18 considerations are these 6 senses plus the 6 objects of the senses plus the 6 consciousnesses that arise with the sense. So in essence, you see something. You see a watch. That's one consideration. The eye sees the watch. That's the second consideration. And then you're aware that you're seeing a watch. That's the third consideration. You do this 6 times with the 3 considerations, you wind up with 18. And the 4 determinations, which we'll also talk about later. But if we notice here, he says, he has been stilled where the currents of construing do not flow. The mind is still as long as we're not construing the data that we're getting in. As long as we're not interpreting our experience, as long as we're not fabricating a reality, telling ourselves a story about what's really going on, the mind is still. And that works into the quantum theory of Buddhist psychology. In our day-to-day life, we are so bombarded with data, quantum of data. We can't process it all. We are sensory overloaded just walking through a park. When we're trying to sit and take in all the information that we get from news, from music, from conversation, through visualizations, through hearing, tasting, touching, we're totally overwhelmed. The mind can be aware of everything, but it can only focus on very few things at a time, and it can only attend to one thing at a time. So what the mind does is, as the information comes in, it sorts out patterns. It decides what it wants to experience and what it doesn't want to experience. So that's how it construes its reality. It has to think about it. When the cognitive process of thinking about what I'm experiencing ceases, my mind becomes calm. When this does not flow, this construing, then peace arises. He goes on to say one should not be negligent of discernment. This is wisdom, knowing what is skillful, what is not skillful. One should guard the truth, that is, what's really going on, not what I think is going on. One should not be negligent of his devotion to relinquishment, letting go of what's not skillful, and train only for calm. This is the entirety of the Buddhist practice as far as meditation is concerned. Training to be calm. How can we be calm if we're afraid, jealous, angry, impassioned, have a cause, falling in love? All these things stop us from being calm. Because every time one of these so-called emotions arise, we construe them again and fabricate a reality around them. That is our problem. Okay. Now, these are the 4 determinations that were just mentioned. The determination for discernment, the determination for truth, the determination for relinquishment, the determination for calm. Here we go. Now, one should not be negligent of discernment, should guard the truth, be devoted to relinquishment, and train only for calm. Thus was it said, in reference to what was it said? Love these hypothetical questions. And now, I can't read this. Oh, there it is. And how is one not negligent of discernment? These are the 6 properties. These are the things that we have to know about that constitute a human being. The earth property, the liquid property, the fire property, the wind property, the space property, the consciousness property. These are the elements. Earth, water, fire, air, space, often called akasha, and consciousness, things that can be directly experienced, that we can touch. We can touch the earth quality of the human being. We can experience the liquid property of a human being, the moistness, the fire property, how warm we are or not warm, the wind property, the breath, the space property, how massive we are or how small we are, and the consciousness property. These are the 6 things that we need to be determined to directly experience when we experience our own humanity. This takes us right back to mindfulness meditation, watching the body, the sensation, the qualities. What kind of an element is it that I am watching? Now, we have some assumptions about the mind. There we go. To stick with these 4 determinations, the mind has to make assumptions about itself, its power to do the necessary work and to receive the anticipated benefits. If the mind, my mind for instance, decides, excuse me, I'm working through a summer cold. If my mind makes the determination that I just don't have the energy to do this work, if I'm just not smart enough to do it, it's not going to happen. My mind makes an assumption of what it can or cannot do, depending on whether it wants to or not. At different times, the mind makes different assumptions about itself. Sometimes we feel very stupid, sometimes we feel very smart. If we use our determination, if we use our willpower, the mind will not vacillate nearly as much as it ordinarily does. Now, the Buddha's strategy as a teacher was that even though his primary focus was on the mind as a teacher, he nowhere defines it. Instead, he says, if you define yourself, you also limit yourself. And after all you are is mind accompanied by this physical body. And even the physical body becomes part of the mind. Mind is a huge thing. So he challenges us not to define ourselves as this, that, or the other thing. Instead, he asks us to expand, not put boundaries on who and what we think we are. Instead of defining the mind, defining the human being, he focuses all his teachings on assumptions of what the mind can do. And what can it do? It can change very, very quickly. There is no adequate analogy, said the Buddha, to explain how quickly the mind can change. We say it changes in a twinkling of an eye, but it's much faster than that. It takes about 1/25 of a second to blink your eye. The mind can change twice during that period of time. It is that fast. Varieties of mind. We can say that there are varieties of mind because, well, you got 52 qualities of mind. You have a bazillion experiences that are constantly affecting the mind. The mind is neither good nor bad, but it can do a huge variety of good and bad things. We fantasize a lot, we think a lot, we say, oh, I wish them no ill will, but it'd be nice if they keeled over. We don't want to think bad things about people, but we think them anyway. The mind is an independent actor in much of our lives. It's not the way it's supposed to be, but it is somehow that way. And we're educated to be that way. We call it being a free thinker. Actually, we have to make a decision at one point or another. Who's in charge here? Am I the prisoner of the mind, or is the mind my servant? It's a tool. And we'll explain that a little bit more in a minute. The mind is more variegated than the animal kingdom, said the Buddha. Think about how many species of insects there are. Fish in the ocean or in a freshwater lake. How many varieties of birds there are. How many varieties of worms. How many varieties of snakes. How many varieties of larger animals. Cute animals. Animals that are not so cute. Well, it takes the mind to recognize these things. Not only does the mind recognize all of these animals. In Buddhist terms, when the mind is recognizing one kind of animal, that is a different mind that is recognizing a different kind of an animal. It has that many varieties. But it also can recognize animals that are extinct and animals that have never existed. It can recognize things which aren't, or which are no longer. It can recognize different realities. It's constantly in motion. So we can say that there are a lot of varieties of mind. And why are there so many? Well, the variety comes from the many different choices that the mind makes under the influence of ignorance and defilement. The more ignorant we are, the more varieties of mind we have. The more aversions and attachments we have, the more varieties of mind we have. There are more things to be averse to. There are more things to attach to. We're constantly in motion, either towards something or away from something. And if we keep ourselves in the dark, who knows what we can come up with. But the mind doesn't always have to be defiled. There are some teachers that would claim that everything that happens to us is the result of our past karma or karma. This is not true. If I walk outside and a meteor falls out of the sky and hits me, that is not the result of my past karma. Sometimes rocks fall out of the sky. If I catch a cold, that is not the result of my past karma. Sometimes colds happen. The way the Buddha explains it, karma is a totally psychological process. Now, when we act on our karma, there are bound to be effects of our actions. That's not the result of our karma, that's the result of our actions. Karma is intention. What is it that I intended? I did not intend to catch a cold. As a matter of fact, there's a very elegant sutta in the Pali Canon where the Buddha explains how sometimes a cold is just a cold. It's not the result of something you did in a past life. But the mind is ignorant and it is defiled, so it wants to find reasons for even the most random of actions, things that it cannot explain, like when bad things happen to good people or good things happen to bad people. But the mind does not always have to be that way. Past karma is not deterministic, even though it does shape the range of options open to the mind at present. It doesn't determine what our present karma is going to be. Let me explain that. Our past karma will influence us up to a point, but then we have to make a decision on which option is presented to us. If we've had many experiences with something in the past, then we'll have many options of what to do with that something. In the present, our present karma will determine which option we choose. It's kind of like living in a multiverse, where when presented with a situation, every possible option exists simultaneously. And we choose which universe we're going to enter and act out in. Again, this is the quantum theory of mind. So, in the present, we create new karma by choosing a particular option, an option that was presented to us because of our past karma. So our past karma influences us, but it does not determine what it is that we're going to do. Not everything is a result of past karma. Mainly, it's a result of present karma. Present karma can choose to continue creating conditions for more ignorance, or not, because our present choices are what is keeping the ignorance alive. No one, not even a Buddha, can trace back to when the development of ignorance and defilements of ignorance, aversion and attachment first began. In fact, he said that was a rather useless question, because it's been happening forever. The continued existence of ignorance depends on conditions continually provided by unskillful karma. And remember, by ignorance he did not mean stupidity. By ignorance he meant being blind, not seeing, deliberately ignoring something. If these conditions of past unskillful karma are removed, then ignorance will also be disbanded. It's a pretty cut and dried situation. And this is why the Buddha said that the mind is luminous, because it doesn't have to be defiled and ignorant. It doesn't have to live in darkness. It can be a bright, shining thing. It's stained with defilements that simply come and go. Taken out of context, this statement might sound sort of like the mind is inherently awake and enlightened. And believe it or not, there are schools of Buddhism which actually teach that. But in the context, the Buddha is simply saying that the mind once stained is not permanently stained. When the conditions for the staining is gone, the mind becomes luminous again. But this luminosity is not an awakened nature. It's simply a characteristic of the mind. In in the scheme of the Four Noble Truths, if something is to be developed, it is not the goal. It's part of the path to the goal. After this luminosity has been developed in advanced stages of concentration, it's to be abandoned because it's completed its work in helping us pierce through ignorance. The luminous mind is the tool that we use to get to the goal. Therefore, it is part of the path. It is to be discarded. Therefore, it cannot be the goal of the path. So the idea that this luminous mind is inherent enlightenment is kind of missing the point. While it's nice to have a luminous mind, because it really makes life a lot easier, it's not the end-all be-all of practice. So what can we say about original enlightenment? This whole idea, which is kind of embarrassing when you think about something. The organization that I'm the spiritual director of is called Hongaku Jodo, meaning primal light pure land, or the pure land of primal light, original light. But in East Asian Buddhism of China, Vietnamese, and Japan, the word Hongaku is often translated as inherent, innate, intrinsic, or original enlightenment. And it's the view that all sentient beings are already enlightened or awakened in some way. That includes your drug-addled mother-in-law, your drunken next-door neighbor, your abusive boss, the dog that's using your flower bed as a toilet, the bacteria that are infecting your pimple. Every living thing has inherent enlightenment in one way or another in this view. A well, maybe. Let's examine that for a minute. This idea of inherent enlightenment is closely tied to the concept of Buddha nature and Tathagata Garbha, the web or womb of reality. Both ideas are kind of a backdoor way of getting a soul theory back into Buddhism. Remember, the Buddha is teaching that there is nothing inherently essential about mind. It just comes and goes. Nothing inherently essential about the body. It changes, it comes, and it goes. Consciousness, on the other hand, is kind of essential to this whole process. But when you reach Buddhahood, it disappears. As we crave being, as we crave being somebody, as we crave being something, as we crave being alive, we also develop theories of immortality. So the Buddha didn't talk about immortality, he talked about deathlessness. If a mind is pure and luminous, beings created by our mind, that would be the Mui who is being angry, or the Mui who is being loving, or the Mui that's being hungry, or the Mui that's craving a cigarette, or the Mui that wants to go out tonight. These different Muis do not arise. There's only the calm Mui who is experiencing equanimity. That Mui doesn't die, so another Mui takes its place. This is deathlessness. So with the breakup of the body and mind, there's no rebirth, because that Mui doesn't crave a new existence. There is contentment in the existence that Mui has. That's the gist of the teaching anyway. In the Hongaku shiso, which is the Japanese expression for this, there are two philosophical elements. One is radical non-dualism. Everything is empty and interconnected, so that the differences between ordinary persons and Buddha and all other distinctions are negated. Well, Buddha certainly didn't teach that. Excuse me again. Non-dualism arose as a teaching within the context of Buddhism in the meditation aspect of Buddhism, where when a meditator is having an experience, he cannot divorce himself from the experience, nor can he divorce the elements of that experience from the experience. It's all one single entity. The experiencer and the experience have a non-duality. You gotta have both. They become each other. Be one with the bush while you're clipping it. Be one with your dinner. Be one with whatever it is you're experiencing. This was the original idea. And in point of fact, when we take into account all the aggregates and things, the nature of mind, since it is mind that is creating both me as the experiencer and the stuff that I'm experiencing, there's no duality there either, because it's all a creation of mind. Mind is creating itself and the situation, the circumstances. That's as far as non-duality ever got in the Buddha's teachings. The Abhidhamma, they take it a little bit further, but not much. The second part of this philosophy is that Hongaku affirms the phenomenal world as an expression of this non-dual realm of Buddha nature. Okay, let's look at that. Enlightenment on one hand, phenomena and things on the other are expressions of each other. Worldly passions are enlightenment in this view. Birth and death on one hand are the same as nirvana on the other. Samsara, this whole round of suffering, is identical to utopia. This is certainly not what the Buddha taught, but that's what comes down to us. The idea that suffering is enlightenment and enlightenment is suffering is kind of bizarre. It's a way of, saying I can do whatever I want to do because I'm enlightened. I can get away with it. I see my enlightenment in my cravings. It's okay to have delusions because it proves I'm already enlightened, because I know they're delusions. therefore it's okay. My attachments, cravings, and addictions are okay because I know they're only cravings, attachments, and addictions. It's a way of justifying our self-destructive behavior in the name of higher truth. Well, it's probably not good for you. Questions about this innate enlightenment idea that arose is, if something with an awakened nature can suffer, what good is the awakened nature? Since that's precisely the opposite of what Buddha taught. How could something that's innately awakened and enlightened already ever become defiled in the first place? And if my original Buddha nature became diluted and I become enlightened again, what's to stop it from becoming diluted once more? So there are all kinds of philosophical gymnastics that go along with this original enlightenment idea. In the Buddha's own terms, in his own teachings, there is no original enlightenment. The luminosity of mind is neither good nor evil, but it does allow us to know what good and evil are. That luminous mind creates the circumstances in which skillful qualities can be brought into being, in which they can do their work to bring the mind to a place where it goes beyond both good and evil, transcending even that luminosity. Which means that the path to enlightenment is not inevitable, as the Hongaku shiso doctrine suggests. There's actually a simile that the Buddha uses. He was asked by a Brahmin one time, how many of your disciples are going to become enlightened? All of them? Half of them? A third of them? Buddha didn't answer. Refused to answer. Ananda, his assistant, his cousin, got a little panicky at that. You know, Buddha, why didn't you answer? I mean, guy's going to think you don't know. Well, the Buddha said two interesting things. First of all, it wasn't his business whether you became enlightened or not. He offered you the path. It's up to you to become enlightened. And second of all, nobody knows how many people are going to become enlightened. Certainly not everybody. And he said it's sort of like a gatekeeper at a fortress where there's only one gate that enters in and out. He knows that not everybody's going to enter into the fortress. But everybody that enters into the fortress has to enter through that gate. It's like enlightenment. Not everybody's going to become enlightened. But everybody who's going to become enlightened has to enter and walk that path. So, we know some people will become enlightened, but not everybody. Certainly not people I don't like. That was a joke. Luminous mind is not innate enlightenment. We don't have an awakened nature that forces us to gain awakening at some point. Awakening is still a choice. The universe is still a free country. What we do have is a desire for happiness. And the luminous mind knows that. It's capable of knowing that there is suffering, and it's capable of watching. It's capable of developing the qualities that allow you to see where the suffering's coming from, and to see where that suffering's not necessary. And it can also see how you can put the suffering to an end. That's a tool. It's a helping instrument. It is not the enlightenment. It's not even part of enlightenment itself. Sometimes, when people get really, really good at meditation, they gain this luminous state of mind. And it's really kind of a trippy thing to get into. It's very cool, just being pure, expansive consciousness. The mind gets into a wide open space, literally an expanding consciousness. And sometimes when people get to that point, they think they're enlightened. It's a little bit like a 1967 acid trip. You really think you've got it going on. And not a month goes by that I do not see a publication, either online or in a bookstore, where somebody declares themselves an arahant, a fully enlightened being, because they've had this experience. Well, luminosity is a condition that allows the mind to see. But the awakening comes from our determination not to keep suffering. Remember, according to the Buddha, enlightenment is the absence of craving, the absence of ill will, the absence of ignorance. That's enlightenment. An arahant, a fully enlightened being, has diminished the sense of self and ego to the point where it's merely a social convention. I have to identify myself as somebody, or else I can't talk with you. I have to identify myself as somebody, or else I can't get a job. I have to be able to write a check, or else I can't pay my mortgage. These are conventions, and the self is no longer taken terribly seriously. This self-absorbed mania we got going on here is diminished. And yet, if you read any one of these books, the self-proclaimed arahant, the self-proclaimed living Buddha, is going to tell you how cool he or she is, because they did it their way. There's only one way to do it. We all go down the same road. We all take the same path. It's just some of us walk with a limp, some of us walk quickly, some of us walk a little more slowly. We do it at our own pace. We don't do it all at the same time. Ajahn Mun likened this determination, this luminosity, to being a warrior. And we're all warriors in this battle against our own defilements, ignorance, attachment, and aversion. And discernment is our prime weapon. And he asks, what in the mind is the warrior? Well, the warrior is determination. It's not me. It's the determination that arises in the mind, which is the warrior. And the warrior's main weapon is discernment. In other words, the main weapon of determination is wisdom. And the determination is not to become the laughingstock of our own cravings. Are we going to master them, or are they going to master us? Am I just a puppet on a string? Or am I the one handling the string? The determination to stop suffering needs to be held on to until the suffering actually ends. Willing, force of will, is a necessary element on the path, and without that willing, nothing's going to happen. The luminosity of mind is what allows us to do the work. It allows us to straighten out our own stuff. I had another word in there. I erased it. But it allows us to illuminate our own stuff, straighten it out. But we have to be determined to use it. That is the teaching. I seem to have gone down. Well, I wonder what page I was on. Oh, there it is. I sent the wrong file, so it came through as a PDF instead of a PowerPoint. Luminosity will do the work. Yes. There we go. So the Buddha made some assumptions about the mind. The mind can be trained. It can be trained to awaken. It can be trained to see the causes of ignorance. And it can be trained to bring these causes and ignorance to an end. The primary step in this training is determination. And it is the determination not to neglect wisdom, discernment, which we do all the time. Discernment is inside itself. To what extent do we consciously neglect discernment? Well, all the time. Every time it becomes convenient, we will neglect the insights that we have made. Discernment is insight into how the mind fabricates experience. It's like a factory that's constantly putting out new product. The process of fabrication is going on all the time, in front of our eyes, backstage. It's constantly happening. And somehow we close our eyes to this fact, thinking that our experiences are happening spontaneously, separate from us. I'm a cat guy. To me, all cats are cool. I'm not really a dog guy. But every once in a while, I'll see a dog that I think is really fantastic. Why is that dog fantastic? Because I have interpreted him that way. I decided what qualities in that dog are fantastic. Just as I determine what is adorable about my kittens. What I like about one person or dislike about another. I'm creating that. Not the person I like or the person I dislike. That's all me. So we know that our thoughts create our reality. How many of us are wondering what we were thinking when we created it? We keep a blind eye to it. We just don't want to see. The process of fabrication is never ending. We tend to be more interested in what it is we have created from this fabrication than in the process of the fabrication itself. We get entwined in the physical, the mental, the emotional states, and we want to savor them. We create a cause. We create political philosophy and theater. We decide we're going to be compassionate toward one person or one group of people, but we're not going to be compassionate toward this other group of people. We become blind to one and excessive and obsessive about the other as we create our realities. We don't look behind the curtain. Ajahn Chah once said, life is like a play. We're sitting around, we're enjoying the stage, we see the girls dancing, that's cool, we see the hero come out, beat up the villain, that's great, we get really involved in it. But for some reason we're not hearing the noise of the backstage. We're not paying attention to the sets being moved. We experience this willing suspension of disbelief. We choose to remain ignorant of what's really going on that stage. Well, we also choose to remain ignorant about what's really going on in our lives as well. Sort of like Dorothy, when she first sees the Wizard of Oz. She's so smitten by the sounds, the colors, the flashes of lights, the roar of thunder, she doesn't look behind the curtain. You see the weazened little old man controlling switches and things. We don't look behind the curtain to see how we're fabricating, which is why we need an active will to see through our own deliberate ignorance. Discernment has two sides to it, understanding the mind's fabrications as fabrications, and the motivation to develop this discernment to see why we want it to influence the mind. If we don't understand what our motivation is, it doesn't matter how hard we practice. And this requires appropriate attention. Again, mindfulness practice. Just watching what's going on without judgment, but really watching it. Watching the mind as it fabricates, as it gives shade, hue, and color to what's going on. It also involves seeing how some actions are unskillful and lead us to stress and suffering, while others that are skillful bring an end to stress. And we have to understand that we have the freedom to make that choice. If we set our sights on happiness that is totally harmless, that will require us to pay more attention to what's going on. Motivation to end our suffering requires that we pay attention to what we're doing, to what we're fabricating, and we have to be heedful of that motivation, that it is with us all the time. We have to cultivate it. And encouraging people to become awakened. The Buddha never assumed that people were good, that they had innate goodness as part of their nature, and this would make them want to become enlightened. The Buddha assumed something very, very different, very ordinary. People like pleasure. They don't like pain. They care whether they have pleasure and pain. And it was a mark of his genius that he could see the potential for awakening laid into the desire to avoid pain and be happy. Which brings us to metta. Probably the crowning achievement of the 10 paramitas, the 10 perfections. Loving kindness, goodwill. It's one of the 4 sublime abodes, as well as being number 9 on the top 10 perfections. May I ever be kind, friendly, and compassionate. May I be able to regard all my brothers and sisters and be one with all. Very high aspiration. Whoa. Back up. I will never do this again. Okay, literally, metta comes from the word mitra, or mita, meaning mid to love. Interesting, mid also means to be fat. I thought that was interesting. Gives a whole new meaning to midriff bulge. It also means love, amity, sympathy, friendliness, active interest in others, desire of bringing welfare and good to one's fellow. As metta bhavana, it means the cultivation of loving kindness or friendliness toward all living beings, including the cockroach in the cabinet by the flower. Metta viharin is to abide and live in kindness. Metta, as you recall, is the desire that all beings be happy and free from suffering. Karuna is compassion, which is the activity of relieving suffering from other living things. So, we have many more facets to loving kindness, including harmony, inoffensiveness, and nonviolence. And I have a real tough time with that inoffensiveness thing. I tend to offend people quite easily sometimes. Pali commentators define metta as a strong wish for welfare and happiness of others. It's an altruistic attitude of love and friendliness as distinguished from mere amiability based upon self-interest. Metta, when practiced correctly, doesn't have a self-interest. Not specifically. But it fosters the interests of others, because when everybody's doing well, we do well too, since we're part of everybody. In metta, one refuses to be offensive and renounces bitterness, resentment, and animosity. There's that renunciation thing again, which, as I said in an earlier class, is really the crux of the practice of the 10 perfections. Renunciation is letting go. Metta is the idea of letting go of bitterness, resentments, animosity, a focus on myself. Instead, I'll focus on others in a friendly way, be accommodating where I can, benevolent, and it seeks the well-being of others. It's devoid of self-interest, evoking a warm-hearted feeling of friendship, sympathy, and love, which grows boundless and eventually encompasses and embraces all living things. A person involved in the true practice of metta is the ultimate tree hugger. There is no one that they can find animosity toward. Mahametta means universal loving kindness. And it's the recognition that to promote one's own interest is a primordial motivation of human nature. When this urge is transformed into the desire to promote the interest and happiness of others, not only is the basic urge of self-seeking overcome, but the mind becomes universal by identifying its own interests with the interests of all. By making this change, one also promotes one's well-being in the best possible manner. It's the recognition that universal education is a right. The more people that are educated, the better off everybody is. It would also recognize that good health should be a universal right. If everyone is healthy, then everyone benefits. It recognizes that freedom from poverty should be a universal right. That as long as there are poor people, that detracts from the rest of us. We all live in some sort of symbiotic poverty with them. Just like we live in symbiotic illness with people that aren't receiving care, or symbiotic homelessness with people that do not have homes. It says, in essence, this Mahametta, that if we have to take care of everybody. Yes, we are our brother's keeper because it's in our own best interest. When one person benefits, everybody else should benefit as well. Metta is the protective and immensely patient attitude of a mother who forbears all difficulties for the sake of her child and even protects it despite its misbehavior. Protection. That was from the first of the perfections. Protection is an act of generosity. It's also an act of mercy. Patience was also one of the perfections. We talk about the right to life in this country. In Mahametta, everybody has the right to life. There can't be war. There can't be the death penalty. There can't be human suffering where there is metta. That's why it's a perfection. Metta is also the attitude of a friend who wants to give one the best to further their well-being. If these qualities of metta are sufficiently cultivated through metta bhavana, the meditation on universal love, the result is acquisition of tremendous inner power, which preserves, protects, and heals both oneself and others. Think about it. If I can sit in meditation and wish everybody goodwill, happiness, that they not suffer, I'm working from a position of spiritual power. Because I don't need jealousy, which is weakness. I'm not afraid, which is another weakness. There's no anger. Get over the weakness thing. There's no animosity, no ill will. There's only the power that I am content, and I want you to be content as well. It's also pragmatic and necessary. The world is menaced on all sides by all kinds of destructiveness. I was listening to the news today. There's war everywhere. Planes getting shot down, refugees everywhere. It was announced that the United States per capita has some of the poorest people in the world in it. Just amazing what's going on in the world. Ferguson, Missouri. Now, what is it? New Jersey has also got problems with police acting unlawfully. Or that's New York, excuse me. But the news is alarming. Wouldn't a little bit of loving kindness be helpful? I mean, we don't have to become Mahatma Gandhi, but at least let's demonstrate a little bit of civility. Metta is related to generosity, patience, discipline, renunciation, determination, energy, and wisdom. It pulls within itself all other of the perfections because it demonstrates them in such a way that we have to live them out. In the Metta Sutta, there are 3 aspects which are mentioned. The first requires a thorough and a systematic application of loving kindness in one's day-to-day life. Actually gotta live it. It's a sort of fake it till you make it sort of attitude. The second aspect expresses loving kindness as a distinct technique of meditation, Mahabhavana, which leads to samadhi. The third aspect is a total commitment of universal love and its personal, social, and empirical extensions. Loving kindness through all bodily, verbal, and mental activities. And that's not easy. That's why it's called a perfection. Because it ain't easy to maintain or even to get to. We have to practice very, very diligently. The ethics of metta, well, there's an immediate psychological benefit. In the context, ethics is right conduct. It brings immediate happiness and peace of mind. It never gives rise to remorse, worry, or restlessness of mind because it expects nothing in return. Future benefits? Well, a happy rebirth. If not in this life, the next one. You can progress on the spiritual path toward liberation much easier if you're feeling good about yourself. Right speech, right action, right livelihood are all manifestations of the metta practice. And the Buddhist ethics, the metta ethics, I love that term, has 2 aspects to it. One is karita and the other is varita. Karita is things we do. Gentleness in speech, meek, not proud, content, easy to support, that's emotionally and physically, not overly busy, simple in living, tranquil, prudent, not brazen, and not fawning on families. You know, we don't, the context of that is fawning over rich people and people of power. The other, virita, is something we don't do. And that not doing is we do not do any action that would give wise people cause to reprove us. Okay, we already said that. And next week we will finish off the 10 perfections with upekkha, meaning equanimity, and we will also recap. Then you'll be given your exam, and which you'll have to answer. They aren't giving an exam, right? 10 essay questions, 1 on each paramita. All right, that does it. We are all done. Any questions, comments, observations? Dead silence. Ah. Oh, I never noticed that. The microphone goes on when I speak. Cool. All right, then if there is nothing, then I will get off the phone. Thank you very much. Good night.